Hello and welcome to Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. My name is Kelly and I'm a former wedding planner and blogger, and I'm obsessed with weddings. If you're planning a wedding in Ireland, you're in the right place. You're going to learn the tried and tested methods to planning your dream wedding without the added stress. Think of this as your one-stop shop for everything to do with planning your wedding in Ireland. With me, your new wedding planning bestie, and a cup of tea. This is Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. Well, hello and happy Wednesday. Welcome to Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. I am Kelly and I have something really sweet in store for you today because we are talking all about wedding cakes. And when you think about wedding planning and all the amazing and difficult decisions that you get to make when you're planning your wedding, I'm sure one of the fun ones that you're looking forward to is choosing your wedding cake. I know I was very excited about it, so my husband and I couldn't decide what type of cake we wanted, so we ended up having a whole table with a bunch of different cakes that were baked by one of our friends who was on MasterChef. And so the cakes are all really, really delicious, and I have so many fond memories of choosing the flavors and actually having her come into our home and bake the cakes with us in, the couple of days before our wedding. It was really, really special. And so I can testify to the fact that choosing a wedding cake is really fun. It's something you will enjoy doing, but it's also something that your guests will enjoy eating. Now, there are so many things that you can think about when it comes to making all your wedding decisions, lots of things, lots of different factors at play. So when you're choosing your wedding cake, there are 3 things that you need to think about. It's not just what the cake ends up looking like. It's not where you're going to put it. There's so many things. And what it looks like is definitely one of the 3 things, and we're going to get to that. But today I actually have 2 special guests who are going to join me on this episode, and they're going to tell us a little bit more. I've got 2 wedding cake experts who are going to help us choose the perfect cake. So I'm going to quickly list my 3 things to think about when choosing a cake, and the experts will tell us a little bit more. So when choosing the perfect wedding cake, item number 1 is the flavor. You want your cake to taste good. Item number 2 is what it looks like, all about the style. But when you think about style, what factors should you consider? And third item, which is something many people forget to think about, is the size of the cake. How do you know what size the cake should be? How can you judge, how many slices the cake will give you based on how many guests you're going to have? At the end, I'm going to walk you through exactly how many slices of cake you can get for different sizes. And I'm going to give you some factors to consider when determining how big your cake should be. Okay, so let's start with item number 1, which is the flavor of your cake. When it comes to choosing the perfect flavor, you may have a few questions. I certainly did. Questions like, are there any flavors that are off limits? What happens if the flavor that I enjoy is something that my guests don't enjoy? Or the other way around, what if my guests love a flavor and I just really don't like it? So I asked Sarah from Miscellany Cakes to tell me a little bit more about wedding cake flavors, things to consider, what you can get away with doing, and she shared some amazing expert advice, and I think you're going to love this. So let's take a listen.
Sarah from Miscellany Cakes here with my best advice on selecting the flavours for your wedding cake. I always recommend to my couples that they choose the flavours that they love. You can eliminate the stress of trying to please all of your guests and allow your wedding cake flavour choices to reflect what you like. One of my couples recently who had an intimate wedding for 30 guests really loved my tropical coconut and lime flavour, but they didn't know if it would be to everybody's tastes. In the end, they chose it because they loved it and their guests loved it too. My most popular flavours are red velvet, my lovely lemon and double chocolate flavours. I make light, fluffy sponge cakes that are layered with Swiss meringue buttercream, which has a silky smooth and deliciously light texture. It's made by beating egg whites and sugar to an airy meringue texture and then combining that with softened butter. One of my customers even described it like little clouds of heaven on your tongue, so that will tell you how pleasing it is. It's popular to choose more than one flavour if you're having a multi-tiered wedding cake, and in that case you can always include one of the classic flavours, like I have a vanilla and strawberry flavour, which is like a classic Victoria vanilla sponge. Whatever their choice, my promise to my wedding couples is that I will create a delicious wedding cake that looks every bit as good as it tastes, so that it can be a great talking point for the couple and their guests on their wedding day.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your expert advice. That is so helpful. I'm just going to recap a couple of bits that Sarah shared. First thing she shared is pick a flavor that you like. It takes so much of the stress out of the situation if you pick something that you like first. And it's okay if the flavor that you've chosen is a little bit not conventional. Like, I love the sound of the tropical coconut and lime. That sounds incredibly delicious. And some of the other flavor choices that Sarah shared with us were things like red velvet, lemon, and double chocolate. Now, if hearing those flavors hasn't put you in the mood for cake, I don't know what will, but I'm getting excited for cake and wedding cake specifically because it is so, so delicious. So Sarah, thank you for sharing your expert advice. I love the idea of having different flavors for different tiers. It's a great way to have, flavors that the couple really loves, flavors that they know their friends will like, and something that's a bit of a safe choice that they know that, most people will really love, like the vanilla. I think that's really brilliant. So, that's super helpful. But let's move on to item number 2. So what is the second thing that couples need to think about when choosing their cake? And that is, of course, the style and the look of the cake. So we've already addressed that your cake has to taste good, but it also has to look good. And you may have some questions about that too. Things like, how do you choose the look of your cake? What can you put on a cake that looks good but is also edible or really pretty? How do you get your wedding theme into your cake? And, what about the wedding venue? Like, how does that all play a role in choosing the look of the cake? I spoke with Lee from the Cake Specialist all about style and cakes, and I know that you're going to love what she has to say. So let's take a listen, because she is an expert at making cakes look and also taste really, really good.
Hi, it's Lee here from the Cake Specialist. I wanted to talk to you about style when you are choosing your wedding cake. It's very important. So look at your venue, I think. That's the first thing to look at. If you perhaps at a more relaxed sort of venue, maybe in the country, you would want to choose perhaps a naked cake or a cake iced with buttercream. Perhaps fresh flowers, whimsical kind of looks look beautiful here. Something rustic, wooden cake stands. Sugar butterflies are beautiful. I've made dragonflies in sugar before, which are just stunning. So that's that option. Otherwise, a more formal venue would perhaps include a cake with sugar icing. Fondant, sugar paste, more straight lines. So here you could have stenciling on the icing, which is just beautiful. And sugar flowers, large, bold ones, peonies, roses, or tiny, beautiful flowers dotted here and there. Sugar pearls, there are just so many options. Gold and silver details too are just stunning. The third thing I wanted to say, I've been doing cakes for sort of more than 18 years, and I've done a lot of cakes wrapped with chocolate lace collars, which are just stunning. But remember, it's your wedding cake, your wedding day. You choose whatever you dream of. Why not?
That is some good advice. It's your wedding cake, it's your wedding day, so choose what you want to dream of. And I love that. So Lee from the Cake Specialist, thank you for that expert advice. So Lee says one of the first things that you can look at when it comes to the style of your cake is your wedding venue. So for a relaxed venue, something like a naked cake or a cake that has buttercream and fresh flowers, or something rustic like a wooden cake stand, great idea. And if you have a more formal venue, go for things like sugar icing, fondant, straight lines, stenciling. Love those ideas. And love the idea of the chocolate lace collars as well. So we've looked at number 1, which is flavor. We've looked at number 2, which is style. So that addresses the look and the flavors and tastes of the cake. 2 very, very important things. But when you're choosing your wedding cake, you also need to think about item number 3, which is the size. So how do you choose the size of your cake based on how many guests you're having? What factors are there to consider? So my first piece of advice is talk with the person who is making your cake. So they will know exactly what to do. So if you're stuck, your cake maker will know exactly what size cake you need to have. They'll know what size the slices should be. They'll work in conjunction with your venue or catering team. Whoever's serving the meal will usually be the people that will cut the cake. So those are two teams of people that will be able to help you make this decision. But I'm going to help you to be very informed so that when you have these conversations, you know what you're talking about. So this is what we're going to cover today, all about size. First thing you need to remember is that not everybody at your wedding is going to want a slice of cake. So you need to decide on how much cake you actually want to have available. And here are 3 questions to ask yourself to help make that decision. Question number 1, do you want to have a slice per guest? Knowing the information that I've told you that not everybody will have a slice of cake. Question number 2, do you want there to be any cake leftovers? I wanted to have cake leftovers at my wedding because I knew that I probably wasn't going to get to eat much cake on the day. So I actually had a cake box made up with, as I mentioned before, I had a few different cakes. So we had a slice of each cake put into a box, and it went with us to the first part of our honeymoon, which was just down the road from our wedding venue. And so the day after the wedding, we ate cake, and it was amazing. And then question number 3, what size do you want each slice to be? I can give you some insider information. The standard wedding cake serving is 1 inch by 2 inches, or if you want to have a slightly bigger piece, it could be 1.5 inches by 2 inches. And when it comes to the actual size of the cake tiers and how many people you can serve, I'm going to quickly rattle off what the sizes are. And if you want this information in writing, you can visit weddingsonline.ie/blog. So each of our podcast episodes also come out with a written blog post. So if you want to get information like cake sizing, which I'm about to share with you, everything will be in writing on the blog, and you can kind of read the episode breakdown and the transcript of the blog post, and that goes for all past and future podcast episodes and blog posts too. It's all on the Weddings Online blog. So if you want to do a little catch up, if you want to click different links to things, everything is linkable and in writing on the Weddings Online blog. So it's weddingsonline.ie/blog. So when it comes to round wedding cakes, everything is measured in inches. And so I'm going to tell you the size of a cake in inches and how many servings of cake you will get from that cake size. Everything's in inches, and it might seem confusing, but when it comes to round cakes, they're measured in inches, and the measurement is the diameter of the cake. So if you're looking at a round cake from the top down, so kind of like a bird's eye view of a cake, the diameter, so left to right, that in inches is the size of the cake. So a 6-inch cake will give you 12 servings, an 8-inch cake will give you 24 servings. 10 inches will give you 38 servings, 12 inches will give you 56 servings, 14 inches will give you 78 servings, and a 16-inch cake will give you 100 servings. When it comes to square cakes, these are your serving types. 6 inches will give you 18, 8 inches will give you 32, 10-inch cakes will give you 50 servings, 12-inch cakes will give you 72 servings, a square 14-inch cake will give you 98 servings, and a square 16-inch cake will give you 128 servings. I know I just rattled off a whole lot of numbers, so check it out in writing on the blog so that you can keep track of everything. But now there's a little bit more to consider when it comes to the size of your cake, more than just how many guests you're having. So let's say you've decided that you want to have lots of cake for all your guests, you want to have some leftovers, but that might not be the most helpful piece of information because there's still other factors to consider. And these are things that we want to keep in mind when it comes to choosing the size of the cake. Firstly, will there be any other desserts served on the day? Now, you may have a plated dessert and then your wedding cake. You may have a candy buffet. You may have brownies or cupcakes. You may have lots of sweet things, especially if you have a sweet tooth. Why not do that? But the general rule of thumb is to cater for each guest to enjoy 1.5 items in total. So an example could be a slice of cake and a brownie. That's the kind of way you want to cater for things. So consider all the sweet things you're going to have and work it out that way. Next thing, do you plan to save the top tier of your cake for your first wedding anniversary? Because if you do, you don't want to include that top tier in the calculation of how many slices you will have for all your guests, because of course that cake is off limits and you're keeping it aside. You might be wondering, why on earth would you save that top tier? We actually did a past episode, which I will link to in the notes, where we talked all about how to save the top tier of the cake, because traditionally couples do that to enjoy on their first wedding anniversary. But of course, you can only do that if you can preserve that top tier perfectly so that there's no freezer burn or mold or the smells of other food that will be in your freezer. So I walked you through all of that in a previous episode, and I will link that in the notes. Something else you want to consider is the size of your venue. So I know Lee has given us some brilliant tips on keeping the look of the venue in mind and the style, but the size is helpful too, because if you have an amazing grand venue, let's say you've picked this beautiful castle and you've got a small cake, the cake might get lost in the beauty of your amazing venue. In that case, if you feel like you don't need as much cake, but you want it to look really big, instead of, ordering a huge cake that might not get eaten, you could have dummy layers or dummy tiers that make the cake look bigger, but actually only some of the tiers are edible. And your final thing to consider is the serving style. So for example, if you're planning on plating, or let's say you're slicing the cake and it's going to be handed out to everybody, everyone's going to receive a plate with a slice of cake, then you're going to want to have a slice per guest. But if you're planning on cutting your cake and having a table where guests can go and get a slice of their own, you will need to keep in mind that a lot of guests probably won't go and get cake, especially if the dancing has already started, because cake just isn't for everyone. So consider that so that you know if you want to have a slice per guest, it's just a helpful piece of information so that you're not ending up with a whole bunch of leftovers and nowhere for them to go. Well, just to recap, there are 3 things that you need to consider when choosing the perfect wedding cake. That is your style, it is your flavors, and it is the size. So thank you very much to Sarah and Lee for sharing expert advice. I'm going to drop a link to where you can find out more about those 2 incredible suppliers. And if you want them to make your wedding cake, they'd be delighted to chat with you. Well, thank you for listening today. The Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online podcast is produced by me, Kelly, and mixed, mastered, and edited by Glenn Hartman. For more wedding planning tips, advice, checklists, and more, visit weddingsonline.ie.